You ever get that feeling like you're just an extra in someone else's story? That was me, clear as day, on a Friday night 6 months ago. Cassie had dragged me to this rooftop party with our friends, though calling them that felt like a stretch. Half the crowd were just faces I vaguely recognized but couldn't put names to. It was one of those gatherings where everyone's sort of connected, but nobody's truly close. A mix of colleagues, old classmates, and those random plus ones who somehow become regular fixtures. Take Chris, for instance. He'd only been part of the group for about half a year, and no one seemed to know his origin story. He just showed up one day and stuck around. Chris had this knack for planting himself at the center of attention, throwing out jokes that were more cringe than clever, yet still managed to pull laughs. Cassie thought he was hysterical. Me? I found him to be an obnoxious tryhard. As usual, Cassie was in her element that night. She flitted between conversations, her laugh carrying above the hum of the crowd, her hair flipping as she flashed that dazzling smile, one she reserved for everyone but me. Meanwhile, I kept to the sidelines, nursing my whiskey and pretending I wasn't miserable, while she soaked up the spotlight. I could have brushed it off, chalked it up to Cassie just being Cassie, but then I noticed her phone. It was on the table, buzzing like crazy. She'd glance at it, smirk this sly little smirk, then flip it face down. Trying to keep my voice steady, I asked, "Who's texting you so much?" "Work," she replied, not even sparing me a glance. "Work? At this hour?" Finally, she looked up, already wearing that irritated expression she seemed to save just for me. "Not everyone clocks out at 5, Noah." I swallowed my irritation, forcing myself to drop it, but my stomach was twisting in knots. Then came the moment I'd replay in my head 100 times. Cassie stood up, holding her wine glass, and tapped it with her fork. The room hushed, all eyes locking on her. She thrived on moments like these, being the star of the show. "To my husband, Noah," she began, her smile sugary sweet as she looked at me. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe she was about to say something kind for once. Wrong. "Noah," she continued, "the man who's always reliable, dependable, and consistent, just like a Honda Civic. Not exactly thrilling, but hey, it'll get you where you need to go." Laughter rippled through the crowd. My face burned with embarrassment. "And," she added, her smile morphing into something sharper, "let's not forget his unique talent for turning every conversation into a lecture on tax deductions. Truly a man of many spreadsheet skills." The laughter grew louder, and Cassie sat down, clearly proud of herself. Chris, naturally, laughed the hardest, smacking the table like it was the joke of the century. He leaned toward me, still grinning. "Man, she's got you nailed, huh? You gotta appreciate her sense of humor." I clenched my jaw so tight it felt like my teeth might shatter. Leaning closer to Cassie, I hissed, "What the hell was that?" "It was a joke," she said, swirling her wine like she hadn't just humiliated me in front of a roomful of people. "Publicly embarrassing me is funny to you?" "God, Noah, stop being so sensitive," she snapped, finally looking at me. "It's not that serious." Before I could even respond, her phone buzzed again. She picked it up, her fingers flying across the screen as that smug smile crept back onto her face. I couldn't handle it anymore. Pushing back my chair, I stood. "I need some air," I muttered, heading toward the exit. The crisp rooftop air hit me as I leaned against the railing, staring at the glowing city skyline. I tried to steady the storm swirling inside me. Was I making this into a bigger deal than it was? Maybe I was overthinking it. But the truth was, Cassie's behavior hadn't just been off tonight, it had been this way for weeks. The constant buzzing of her phone, her growing distance, and how she seemed to light up for everyone else while barely acknowledging me. And now this? A public roast at my expense? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Cassie. "You okay?" Don't take it so seriously. You know I love you, right? I stared at the message, feeling like it was more of a formality than anything heartfelt. The words felt hollow, as if she was just checking off a box. For the first time since we got married, I didn't reply. When I stepped back inside, something about the atmosphere at the table had shifted, or maybe I was just seeing things differently. Cassie was in deep conversation with Brooke, her best friend and, let's be honest, her biggest enabler. Brooke kept glancing at me with this smug little grin, like she was in on a secret I wasn't. Meanwhile, Chris was sprawled in his chair, scrolling through his phone and occasionally chuckling to himself. Every time his eyes drifted toward Cassie, there was a look on his face, a mix of amusement and satisfaction, maybe? "Noah, buddy," one of the guys called out, waving me over. "Lighten up, grab another drink." I forced a weak smile, headed to the bar, and ordered another whiskey. My gaze stayed fixed on Cassie as I sipped my drink. She was laughing louder than usual, tossing her hair back like she didn't have a care in the world. And then I noticed it. Brooke slid Cassie's phone across the table. Cassie glanced at the screen for barely a second, biting her lip as though suppressing a grin. Just like earlier, she flipped the phone face down, hiding it from view. That was the breaking point. I couldn't just sit back anymore. I walked over to the table, leaned in close, and said, "We're leaving. Now." Cassie looked up at me, her eyebrows lifting in disbelief. "What? Why?" "Because I said so," I shot back, my tone sharp. Brooke, never one to sit on the sidelines, chimed in. "Oh, come on, Noah. Let Cassie have her fun. She's been working so hard. She deserves a night out." I ignored her, focusing on Cassie. "If you don't get up right now, I'm leaving without you." Cassie rolled her eyes and grabbed her bag, tossing her napkin onto the table like it was some huge inconvenience. "Fine. If it's that important to you." The walk to the car was heavy with tension. Cassie crossed her arms, her gaze fixed out the window as we drove home in silence. It wasn't the kind of silence you could fill with small talk, it was the kind that grew louder with every second. I didn't say a word, my mind racing in circles. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I really wanted to know what was going on, or if it was already too late to fix things. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the weight of unspoken words had grown unbearable. Cassie didn't slam the car door when she got out, that would have taken too much effort. Instead, she sighed dramatically, like she was the one who'd been wronged, and headed straight inside. I followed her, tossing my keys onto the counter. She kicked off her heels and grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge like nothing had happened. "You want to explain what that was all about?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. Cassie turned to me, her expression one of exaggerated confusion. What was all about? The toast? The phone? Chris laughing like a jackass all night. Take your pick. She rolled her eyes and leaned against the counter. "Oh my God, Noah. It was a joke. You're being so dramatic." "You called me a Honda Civic, Cassie," I snapped, my voice rising. "In front of everyone." Her lips curved into that familiar, infuriating smirk she'd perfected over the years. "Well, you are reliable," she shot back, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. I felt my grip on the counter tighten as the anger boiled over. "This isn't about the damn toast, Cassie. You've been acting different, distant, and don't even get me started on your phone buzzing non-stop tonight." Cassie crossed her arms, the smirk vanishing from her face. "I'm sorry if I don't want to spend every minute of my life stroking your ego, Noah. Maybe it's time you take a long, hard look in the mirror." That was it. I couldn't take any more. Without another word, I stormed past her and into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, and my head felt like it might explode from the pressure. Then I saw it, her purse, carelessly tossed onto the bed. And sticking out of it, like a taunting clue, was her iPhone. I should have stopped myself. Really, I should have. But my mind was racing with all the little red flags from the past few months, the late nights, the whispered conversations with Brooke, the endless excuses to catch up with friends. And tonight, Chris grinning at me like he knew some big secret. So yeah, I grabbed the phone. The screen lit up with a notification, and my stomach dropped. Chris, you were on fire tonight. Can't stop thinking about that dress. I didn't even hesitate. Cassie never bothered with a complicated passcode, so I unlocked her phone and went straight to the messages. There it was, a thread between her and Chris that stretched back for weeks, maybe even months. I didn't have to scroll far to find the kind of messages that would make any guy's stomach churn. Chris, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about it. Cassie, me too. Can't wait for the next time. My hands shook, but I kept scrolling, each message hitting me like a punch to the gut. There wasn't any room for misinterpretation, no way to tell myself it was just harmless banter. This was exactly what it looked like. And then it got worse. I scrolled up to the beginning of their thread, all the way to the first message Chris had ever sent her. Chris, hey, Brooke said I should reach out. She thinks you could use a distraction. Brooke. Of course, she was involved. I set the phone down, trying to process what I'd just seen. My head was spinning, and this unbearable mix of anger, betrayal, and disgust churned inside me. But I wasn't done yet. I opened her photos next. I know. By this point, I'd crossed every boundary there was. But I needed to see the full picture, every lie, every betrayal. There they were, selfies of the two of them, hidden in a private album. Photos of them at places I didn't even recognize. One was from 2 weeks ago, taken at a cozy little cafe downtown, the same day Cassie had told me she was stuck in back-to-back meetings. And then there was the video. I didn't even press play. The thumbnail alone was enough, Cassie leaning into him, laughing like he'd just said the funniest thing in the world. That image burned into my mind. I quickly copied everything to my phone, just in case, and then locked hers, dropping it back onto the bed. I sat down, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. This wasn't just some careless fling. This was deliberate, calculated. She'd gone out of her way to keep it hidden, making me feel like I was the problem while she carried on behind my back. The door creaked open, and Cassie stepped inside. The look of irritation on her face shifted into something darker, suspicion. "What are you doing?" she asked, her eyes darting toward her phone. Panic started to flicker across her expression. I held up the phone, my hands trembling. "Care to explain this?" Her face hardened in an instant. "Were you going through my stuff?" Cassie demanded, her voice sharp. "Are you seriously flipping this on me right now?" I snapped, standing up so fast the bed creaked beneath me. "How long, Cassie? How long has this been going on?" She crossed her arms, her lips twisting into that maddening smirk I'd come to hate. "Does it matter?" Something inside me shattered. "Does it matter?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been sneaking around with him, that smug, arrogant jackass, and you have the audacity to act like I'm the one in the wrong?" Cassie took a step closer, her tone cutting and cold. "Oh, give me a break, Noah. Maybe if you weren't so damn boring, I wouldn't have needed someone else to remind me what fun feels like." Without thinking, I grabbed her phone and hurled it into the trash can beside the bed. It landed with a satisfying thunk. Cassie's eyes widened in shock, and for the first time all night, she looked genuinely furious. "What the hell is wrong with you, Noah?" she shouted, rushing to the trash to retrieve it. "Are you completely insane?" "Not insane," I said, my voice low and steady. "Just done. Done with you, done with him, done with this whole mess. You threw our marriage in the trash, thought I'd return the favor. She fished the phone out of the trash, her fingers brushing over the now dented casing. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but instead, she let out this bitter, hollow laugh. Fine, she said, snatching her bag. You want me gone? I'll go. You'll see how much you miss me when you're sitting here all alone, boring yourself to death. With that, she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. And just like that, she was gone. I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the trash can where her phone had landed moments before. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left behind the cold, echoing emptiness of her last words. The house was unnervingly quiet without her. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, mocking me, a sickly reminder that she'd been here not long ago, treating me like I was the villain in her story. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands gripping my own phone. Everything I'd copied from hers was safely stored, the messages, the pictures, the damning evidence of her betrayal. It felt like reliving a nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. I don't know how long I stayed there, drowning in the silence. My chest tightened, my mind racing with a flood of questions, each one more painful than the last. Why Chris? Why now? And how could I have been so blind to it all? I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me untangle the chaos in my head. So, I called Zach. Zach had been my best friend since childhood, the guy who always knew how to cut through the noise and get to the heart of things. He lived a couple of states away now, but that had never stopped us from keeping in touch. If there was anyone who could help me make sense of this disaster, it was him. Noah? What's up, man? You sound off, Zach said when he picked up. Cassie's cheating, I blurted out. I didn't have the energy for small talk. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. Shit, Zach finally said, his voice low. You sure? Zach asked, his voice hesitant. Yeah, I said, my words trembling. Texts, photos, the whole ugly mess. And it's with Chris, of all people. Chris? Zach practically spat the name. That loudmouth clown? Jesus, I always thought he was a jerk, but this? Damn. He let out a low whistle. Man, I'm sorry. That's rough. I didn't hold back. I told him everything, the toast, the messages, the photos, all of it. Zach didn't interrupt, just let me get it all out. When I finally stopped, he sighed deeply. Look, I know what you're thinking, he said. But going after Chris? Not worth it. I wasn't going to, I started, but Zach cut me off. Don't lie to me, Noah. I know you. Right now, you're probably imagining yourself knocking his teeth out. But listen to me, that's not the play. You don't want to let a scumbag like Chris drag you down into something stupid. You're better than that. Handle this smart, not angry. He was right, of course. But knowing he was right didn't make the anger fade. What do I do, then? I asked, my voice barely audible. You do what she never expected, Zach said firmly. You get your ducks in a row. Lawyer up, protect yourself, and let her feel what it's like to lose for a change. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been run over. Sleep had been a cruel stranger, and the moments I managed to drift off were plagued by vivid nightmares of Cassie and Chris laughing together, mocking me. I dragged myself out of bed, brewed coffee that tasted like nothing, and sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. That's when I decided to call Brooke. I wasn't even sure what I wanted out of her, an apology, an explanation, maybe just acknowledgement. I needed her to own up to the fact that she'd handed Chris the keys to my marriage like it was some twisted game. Brooke answered on the second ring, her tone annoyingly chipper. Noah. What's up? I didn't bother with pleasantries. What the hell were you thinking, Brooke? There was a pause, just long enough to make my blood boil. Excuse me? You know exactly what I'm talking about, I snapped. Chris. You're the one who introduced him to Cassie. You encouraged this. Don't play dumb with me. Brooke let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind she always used when she thought someone was being overdramatic. Look, Noah, I don't know what you're accusing me of, but whatever's going on between you and Cassie? That's your problem, not mine. Not your problem? I shot back, my voice rising. You told Chris to talk to her. I saw the texts, Brooke. Don't even try to deny it. Okay, fine, she snapped, her tone suddenly defensive. Yeah, I told him to reach out. So what? Cassie was miserable, Noah. She needed someone who could remind her what it's like to feel alive again. Her words hit like a gut punch. Alive again? I echoed, stunned. Are you serious? She's married, to me. If she had a problem, she could have come to me. Instead, she sneaks around with Chris, and you just, what? Cheer her on? You don't get it, Brooke said, her tone dripping with condescension. Cassie's been unhappy for years, Noah. She felt trapped. And honestly, I don't blame her for wanting more than this. This? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. What the hell is this supposed to mean? You're boring, Noah, Brooke said bluntly, each word like a fresh wound. You're predictable. Cassie wanted excitement, and you, well, you're just you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So this is my fault now? I said, my anger boiling over. She cheats on me, and somehow, I'm the bad guy? I'm not saying it's all your fault, Brooke said, her fake sympathy as insulting as her words. But maybe, just maybe, you should have seen this coming. That was the final straw. You know what, Brooke? You're just as bad as Chris. You act like you're better than everyone else, but all you do is stir the pot and sit back to enjoy the fallout, I said, my voice sharp. If Cassie needed someone to remind her what alive feels like, maybe you should have suggested a therapist instead of throwing the first sleazebag you could find at her. Brooke opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I hung up. My hands were trembling, but for the first time in days, my mind felt clear. That night, I made 2 calls. The first was to a lawyer. I needed to protect myself, make sure Cassie didn't walk away with more than she deserved. The second was to Zach. She's not going to see this coming, I told him, pacing the living room. I've got the texts, the photos, everything. The lawyer said it's solid. She's going to lose. Zach chuckled softly. That's the Noah I know. Smart. Strategic. Keep your head in the game, man. Don't let her drag you down to her level. Don't worry, I said, a grim smile tugging at my lips. I'm just getting started. A few days after my call with Brooke, I was starting to feel a little more grounded. Claire, my lawyer, was already drafting the paperwork, and I was pulling together every document I could to secure my financial footing. I wasn't okay, not yet, but I was functioning. Then Cassie texted me. We need to talk. 4 words that sent my blood boiling. No apology. No explanation. Just Cassie being Cassie, acting like she still had control of the situation. I didn't bother responding. That evening, I went home, locked the door, and prepared myself for whatever storm she planned to bring. Sure enough, at 8 p.m., she showed up. Cassie didn't knock. She just strolled in, like she still owned the place. I was sitting on the couch, sifting through emails, and I didn't bother standing up. Make yourself at home, I said dryly. Ignoring my sarcasm, she dropped her bag on the counter and crossed her arms. We need to talk, she said, her tone firm, as if she were the one holding the moral high ground. "I'm not interested in whatever excuse you've cooked up," I replied, not even looking at her. "God, you're so dramatic, Noah," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This isn't about excuses. It's about, I don't know, closure." "Closure?" I repeated, finally looking up at her. "You think I'm going to sit here and give you closure after everything you've done?" Her jaw tightened, and she glared at me. "You make it sound like I burned your house down. People cheat, Noah. It happens. Grow up." That was it. I stood, fists clenched at my sides. "You're unbelievable, you know that? You didn't just cheat. You lied to my face, you humiliated me in front of everyone, and now you're standing here acting like it's no big deal? What the hell is wrong with you?" Cassie didn't flinch. If anything, she looked irritated. "Oh, stop playing the victim," she snapped. "You think you were some perfect husband? You were boring, Noah. Predictable. All you ever talked about was work, bills, and retirement plans. I needed more. So, naturally, you turned to Chris," I shot back. "A guy who probably spends more time crafting his Instagram captions than paying his rent." Her lips curled into that infuriating smirk. "Chris made me feel alive. Something you haven't done in years." The room fell silent. Her words hung in the air, poisonous and deliberate. I could feel my chest tightening, my pulse pounding in my ears. "You're disgusting," I said, my voice icy. "And for the record, Chris doesn't make you feel alive. He makes you feel validated, and that's probably the only thing you've ever cared about." Cassie laughed, a cold, mocking laugh, and shook her head. "Wow," Cassie scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "You really think you're better than everyone else, don't you? That holier-than-thou attitude of yours is exactly why I stopped putting any effort into us." "Stop trying?" I barked, stepping closer. "Let's not rewrite history, Cassie. You never tried. You played the role of perfection while blaming everyone else for your miserable life." Her face darkened, but she didn't flinch. "At least I didn't waste my life being mediocre, Noah. Face it, you're nothing special. Chris might not be perfect, but at least he's exciting." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, sure. Real exciting. Let's see how thrilling he is when he inevitably screws you over. You think you're special to him? You're just another fling, Cassie. And when he moves on, you'll have nothing left." For the first time, I saw a crack in her armor, just for a moment. But she quickly recovered, her smirk snapping back into place like a shield. "Better than being stuck with you," she said coldly. That's when I realized there was no saving this conversation, or anything else. "You're pathetic," I said quietly. "Get out." She tilted her head, as if weighing whether to argue, then grabbed her bag. "Fine. But don't come crying to me when you realize how much you'll miss me." I didn't respond. I just stood there, watching as she walked out the door without so much as a backward glance. The next day, I told Claire everything, the texts, the photos, the financial discrepancies, every disgusting detail. She listened intently, her pen moving quickly across her notepad. When I finished, she looked up and said, "She's going to fight back." "Let her," I replied. "She doesn't deserve a dime." Claire smirked. "With what you've shown me, she's not going to get one either." That small victory was the first thing that made me feel remotely human in weeks. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Brooke. "You really need to apologize to Cassie. She's been through a lot." I stared at the message, unable to believe what I was reading. Apologize? To the woman who cheated on me and then blamed me for it? I texted back, "She's been through a lot. Are you serious? She's the one who destroyed this marriage, Brooke. Stay out of it." Her reply came almost instantly, "You're being petty, Noah. If you'd been a better husband, none of this would have happened." I stared at my phone, anger bubbling over. How could someone be so delusional? Brooke wasn't just enabling Cassie, she was rewriting the entire story to make her the victim. I texted back, "Thanks for the unsolicited advice, Brooke. Maybe you should focus on your own life before lecturing me about mine." I hit send, blocked her number, and tossed my phone onto the couch. I was done playing nice. That night, sleep eluded me. Anger, frustration, and the sheer absurdity of it all swirled in my mind like a raging storm. But underneath it was something else, a bitter clarity. Cassie and Brooke weren't just toxic. They thrived on it. They lived for drama, control, and the satisfaction of making others squirm. And for years, I'd been their perfect target. Not anymore. A few days later, the fallout from Cassie's antics began spreading like wildfire through our social circle. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with texts and missed calls from people I hadn't spoken to in months but who suddenly seemed deeply invested in my personal life. The first call I answered was from Amanda, one of the quieter ones in the group who I'd always thought stayed out of the drama. "Noah," she started cautiously, her voice soft, as if she was afraid I might snap. I heard about what happened. Are you okay?" "Define okay," I replied, leaning back in my chair. There was a long pause on the line before Amanda spoke again, her voice dropping to a rushed whisper. "Look, I just thought you should know, a lot of us, well, we saw this coming." I sat up straight. "Saw what coming?" "Cassie and Chris," she said, her voice barely audible now. "It's been pretty obvious for a while. The way they acted at parties, how they'd sneak off to talk alone. Honestly, Noah, people were starting to think you knew and just didn't care." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked, my voice raw and trembling. There was another pause before Amanda answered. "It's complicated," she said carefully. "Brooke kind of controlled the narrative. She made it seem like you were too distant, too wrapped up in work, and Cassie, well, like she deserved someone who made her happy." I clenched my jaw so tightly I thought my teeth might crack. "Brooke. Of course, it was Brooke." "I'm sorry," Amanda added quickly, as if that could somehow soften the blow. "Thanks for letting me know," I said flatly, then ended the call before she could respond. Not long after, my phone rang again. This time it was Kevin, one of Chris's buddies. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dude," Kevin began, laughing nervously. "I had no idea about you and Cassie. Chris has been keeping things pretty low-key." "Low-key?" I repeated, my voice icy. "Is that what you call sneaking around behind my back and making out at parties?" "Look, man, I'm not saying what he did was right," Kevin stammered. "But Chris, well, you know how he is. He doesn't really think about the consequences. It's not personal." "Not personal?" I snapped. "He slept with my wife. How the hell is that not personal?" Kevin sighed, the sound of someone who regretted making the call in the first place. "I get it, man. I do. I'm just saying, Chris isn't exactly a long-term thinker. This whole thing was probably just fun for him." "Fun," I repeated, the word slicing through my head like a knife. My blood was boiling again. "Let me make something clear, Kevin," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "If Chris wants to keep having fun, he'd better stay far away from me. Because the next time I see him, I won't just be talking." Kevin muttered something about keeping things cool and quickly hung up, probably kicking himself for calling me in the first place. By the end of the day, I'd pieced together a horrifying picture. Almost everyone in our group had known or at least suspected what Cassie was doing, but no one had said a damn thing. Worse, some of them had even encouraged it. And Brooke? She wasn't just complicit, she was the ringleader. She'd spun a story about Cassie being the victim of a dull, loveless marriage, convincing everyone that she deserved a little fun and that Chris was the perfect guy to give it to her. I wasn't just angry. I was disgusted. These people weren't friends, they were vultures, circling the carcass of my marriage and pretending they were doing it out of kindness. That evening, my phone rang again. This time it was Zach. "How's the war going?" he asked, his tone light but tinged with genuine concern. "About as bad as you'd expect," I replied. "Turns out half our so-called friends were in on it." Zach let out a low whistle. "Damn, that's rough. You want my advice?" "Always." "Cut them all loose," he said without hesitation. "Brooke, Chris, the whole lot of them. They're toxic, man. You don't need that poison in your life." "I'm already ahead of you," I said. "Blocked Brooke this morning. Kevin's probably next on the chopping block." "Good," Zach said. "Now, focus on what matters. Your lawyer, your finances, your peace of mind. The rest? Just noise." As always, Zach knew how to cut through the chaos and get straight to the heart of things. That night, I grabbed a notebook and made a list. On one side, I wrote down the names of people I could trust. On the other side, I listed everyone who'd betrayed me. The second list was a hell of a lot longer than the first. But as I stared at it, something inside me shifted. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel anger or hurt. I felt determined. This wasn't just about Cassie or Chris or even Brooke anymore. This was about reclaiming my life, cutting out the rot and starting fresh. A week passed, and I was beginning to feel lighter. Cutting off Brooke and the rest of the backstabbers felt like removing a tumor I didn't even know was there. Claire, my lawyer, had everything under control, and for the first time in ages, I actually slept through the night. Then, Cassie decided to waltz back into my life. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was halfway through reorganizing the garage when I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I ignored it. But then it came again, louder, more impatient. I opened the door, and there she was, looking like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. Her hair was perfectly styled, makeup flawless, and she was wearing one of those outfits that screamed, "I'm doing great without you." "Noah," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Can we talk?" I didn't say a word. I just leaned against the doorframe and folded my arms. Cassie sighed dramatically, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, I know things got messy, but we need to figure this out. For both our sakes." "Figure what out?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. She took a step closer, tilting her head as if she were trying to appear sincere. "Come on, Noah. We were married for years. We can't just throw that away." I laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a loud, bitter laugh. "You're kidding, right? You threw it away the second you decided Chris was worth more than your vows." For a split second, her expression faltered, but she quickly masked it with that practiced smile. "I made a mistake, okay," she said. "I let things get out of hand. But that doesn't erase everything we had." "Cassie," I said, shaking my head. "What we had was a marriage. What you turned it into was a joke, and I'm not interested in being the punchline anymore." Her eyes narrowed. "You're being so damn stubborn. Do you even care about fixing this?" "Fixing this?" I repeated, incredulous. "You didn't come here to fix anything, Cassie. You came here because you're losing. You thought Chris was your golden ticket, and now you're realizing he's just another guy who uses people and moves on. So spare me the crocodile tears." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she didn't have a snappy comeback. "Am I wrong?" I pressed. "Is Chris still in the picture, Or has he already moved on to his next thrill? Her silence said everything I needed to hear. I stepped back and gestured toward the driveway. You can go now, Cassie. I think we're done here. But she didn't move. Instead, her face twisted into something ugly, her voice sharp and venomous. You know what, Noah? You're pathetic. All this talk about vows and loyalty, but you never once made me feel alive. You think you're some noble victim, but you're just boring. Chris was right, you're the kind of guy women settle for, not the kind they want. Her words were designed to cut deep, and they did, but not in the way she thought. As she hurled her insults, all I could think was how grateful I was to finally see her for who she really was. Better now than 5 years down the road. I smiled. Not a forced, bitter smile, a real one. Calm, genuine, and completely unexpected. It clearly caught her off guard. You're right, Cassie, I said. I am boring. I work hard, I pay my bills, and I don't need cheap thrills to feel alive. But you know what else I am? Free. Free of you, your lies, and whatever chaos you'll bring to the next guy who falls for your act. Her jaw tightened, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You'll regret this, she hissed. Doubt it, I replied, stepping back and closing the door in her face. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the closed door and letting the silence settle around me. It felt good. Better than I expected. Like I'd finally reclaimed something I didn't even realize I'd lost. Then my phone buzzed. It was Zach. How's it going? He asked when I picked up. Cassie just showed up, I said. Zach groaned. Let me guess, she gave you the whole, we can work this out, speech? Pretty much, I said, pacing the kitchen. She's good at pretending, I'll give her that. But when I didn't bite, she showed her true colors. Called me boring and pathetic. Zach snorted. Classic projection. You're not boring, she's just terrified of being alone. Yeah, well, that's not my problem anymore, I said. Damn right it's not, Zach replied. So, what's the next move? I paused for a moment, thinking it over. Finish the divorce, rebuild my life, and maybe, just maybe, find a better class of friends. Zach laughed. That's the spirit. And hey, don't forget to invite me to your Cassie Free Life party. I'll be there with bells on. You'll be the guest of honor, I said with a grin. That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry or bitter. I felt free. Cassie's words, harsh as they were, didn't sting like they used to. Because I finally understood something, her opinion didn't matter anymore. I wasn't the villain in her story, I was just her excuse. And now, I didn't have to play that role anymore. As I sat on the couch, sipping a beer and watching the sunset, I felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of something better. A week passed since Cassie's little comeback tour, and I was beginning to settle into my new reality. The divorce paperwork was moving along smoothly, Claire made sure of that, and I'd cleared most of Cassie's leftover junk out of the house. Life wasn't perfect, but it finally felt like I was in control again. And then Chris decided to make his move. It started with a text. Unknown number, hey man, can we talk? It's Chris. Seeing his name on my phone made my stomach churn. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend it never existed. But the other part, the one still burning with unresolved anger, wanted to know what he could possibly have to say. So I replied, "What do you want?" His response came almost immediately. "Noah, I think we need to clear the air. Let me swing by." "You home?" I should have said no. Every instinct screamed at me to shut this down, but some part of me wanted to see him face to face. I wanted to look him in the eye and hear whatever pathetic excuse he was about to serve up. When Chris showed up, he looked exactly like the smug asshole I remembered: designer sneakers, a trendy jacket, and that same self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. "Noah," he said, holding up his hands like he was walking into enemy territory. "Thanks for agreeing to talk. I know things have been tense." "Tense?" I repeated, crossing my arms. "You slept with my wife, Chris. Tense doesn't even begin to cover it." He winced, as if I'd scuffed his precious sneakers. "Look, man, I get it. I screwed up. Big time. But it's not what you think." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? Then by all means, enlighten me." Chris took a deep breath, like he was about to drop some profound revelation. "Cassie came to me," he said, his voice low and dramatic. "She told me you were distant, that she felt trapped, like she couldn't breathe in your marriage. I didn't plan for anything to happen, it just did." "Wow," I said, clapping slowly. "What a beautiful love story. Let me guess, she told you I was boring, and you thought you'd swoop in as her knight in shining armor?" Chris shifted uncomfortably, his smirk faltering for a moment. "It wasn't like that. I mean, yeah, she said some stuff about you, but I didn't take it seriously. She just needed someone to listen." "And you listened," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, all the way into her bed. He held up his hands again, trying to look innocent. "I'm not proud of it, okay? But Cassie's not who you think she is, man. She's a manipulator. She twists things, makes you feel like you're the problem. She did it to me, too." I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. Was this guy actually trying to make himself the victim? "So, let me get this straight," I said, stepping closer. "You want me to feel sorry for you? Because Cassie played you like a fiddle? Newsflash, Chris, you're not the first guy to fall for her act, but you are the one dumb enough to think you'd get away with it." Chris's smirk disappeared completely. "Look, I'm just trying to be honest here. I wanted to apologize, all right? I never meant to hurt you." "You didn't hurt me," I said coldly. "You embarrassed yourself. And for the record, whatever sob story Cassie fed you doesn't excuse what you did. You knew she was married, Chris. You knew, and you didn't care." Chris opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't let him. "You know what?" I said, grabbing a basketball from the porch. "Here's my advice: stop chasing married women. And stop pretending you're some tragic hero who couldn't help himself." Before I could think twice, I hurled the basketball at him. It wasn't hard enough to hurt, but the satisfying thunk as it hit him square in the head was worth every second. "Dude!" Chris yelped, stumbling back. "What the hell? Get off my property, Chris," I said, pointing toward the street, before I decide to throw something heavier. Chris muttered something under his breath but wisely started backing away, hands raised in mock surrender. All right, I'm going. But for what it's worth, man, Cassie's not worth all this anger. Let it go." I watched as Chris walked away, his shoulders slumped like a kid who'd just lost a playground fight. That night, I called Zach. "You'll never guess who showed up at my house today," I said, cracking open a beer. "Oh, let me take a wild guess," Zach said, already laughing. "Chris?" "Bingo. What did he want?" "To clear the air," I said, laughing bitterly. "Apparently, Cassie manipulated him too. Now he's a poor, misunderstood victim." Zach snorted. "Classic Chris. Let me guess, he gave you some half-assed apology and tried to act like he didn't know what he was doing?" "Pretty much," I said. "I told him to get lost. And, well, I might have thrown a basketball at him." Zach burst out laughing. "Man, I wish I'd been there to see that." "Did it hit him?" "Square in his smug face," I said, grinning. "Perfect," Zach said, still laughing. That's the energy you need to keep, man. Don't let these clowns get to you. You're better than all of them. For the first time in weeks, I felt like he was right. That night, as I sat on the couch with my beer, I replayed the conversation with Chris in my head. He'd tried to wriggle out of responsibility, just like Cassie had. But instead of feeling angry or bitter, I felt free. Chris and Cassie were perfect for each other, two selfish, clueless people who cared more about their own thrills than the wreckage they left behind. And me? I was done being part of their mess. A few days later, the divorce proceedings were in full swing. Claire was a godsend, methodically dismantling Cassie's demands with a cold efficiency that made me wish I'd met her under better circumstances. Cassie, on the other hand, was putting on the performance of a lifetime, tears, excuses, and enough dramatic pauses to make a soap opera actress jealous. The first mediation meeting was the real showstopper. It was me, Claire, Cassie, and her lawyer, some overly polished guy named Bryce who clearly thought he was the smartest person in the room. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. We were barely 5 minutes in when Cassie launched into her spiel. "I just feel like I've sacrificed so much for this marriage," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd seemingly conjured out of thin air. "I gave up my career to support Noah, and now he's trying to punish me for one mistake." Claire raised an eyebrow, her pen hovering over her notepad. Her tone was calm, but the sharpness beneath it was unmistakable. "You sacrificed your career?" she asked. "Can you clarify what you mean by that, Mrs. Hayes?" Cassie sniffled dramatically. "I mean, I could have had a real career if I hadn't spent so much time taking care of Noah and making our home a happy place. I couldn't help it," I laughed. Out loud. Cassie shot me a glare that could have melted steel. "Sorry," I said, holding up a hand. "I just needed a second to process that." "You sacrificed your career?" "Cassie, you've never held a full-time job for more than 6 months. And as for our happy home? That was me cooking, cleaning, and paying all the bills while you were out with Brooke or, well, Chris." Bryce cleared his throat, clearly trying to regain control of the room. "Mr. Hayes, there's no need to bring up extramarital issues at this time. We're here to discuss the equitable division of assets." "Fine," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Let's talk assets. Cassie, what exactly are you asking for?" She straightened up, the crocodile tears disappearing like magic. "I want half of everything," she said firmly. "The house, the savings, and spousal support for at least 5 years." Claire didn't even blink. "Mrs. Hayes," she said smoothly, "are you aware that my client has extensive documentation of your financial activities during the marriage? This includes thousands of dollars spent on luxury items, vacations, and, let's call them extracurricular activities." Cassie's face paled, but Bryce jumped in immediately. "That's irrelevant. The court isn't here to moralize." "Maybe not," Claire replied, her tone like silk over steel, "but it is here to ensure financial fairness. And given Mrs. Hayes's spending habits and lack of contributions to the household, we believe her claim to half of the marital assets is excessive." The room fell silent. Cassie, clearly realizing she was losing ground, leaned forward and turned on the waterworks again. "I just don't understand why Noah is being so vindictive," she said, her voice trembling. "We built a life together, and now he's trying to erase me from it." I bit my tongue, letting Claire handle it. "Mrs. Hayes," Claire said icily, "this is not about erasing anyone. This is about ensuring that the party who contributed the majority of the financial stability in this marriage, my client, retains what is rightfully his. Your behavior during the marriage, documented as it is, speaks for itself." Cassie's jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real panic in her eyes. The second mediation meeting was worse, for her, at least. Claire brought the receipts. Literally. Photos of Cassie with Chris, screenshots of their messages, bank statements showing the money she'd siphoned from our joint account for her little escapades. Bryce looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Cassie, of course, tried to pivot into her favorite role, the victim. "This is so unfair," she cried, her voice breaking. Noah knew I was unhappy, but he didn't care. He pushed me to this. "Let me get this straight," Claire said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're claiming that your unhappiness justifies fraud, infidelity, and financial exploitation? Is that your position?" Cassie sputtered, searching for words, but Bryce cut her off, clearly desperate to stop the bleeding. "We'd like to propose a settlement," he said quickly. "Smart move," Claire said, her smile razor-sharp. By the time it was over, Cassie walked away with far less than she'd hoped for. No house, no spousal support, and barely enough from the savings to cover her legal fees. As we left the mediation room, she caught up to me in the hallway, her face twisted with anger. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat, her voice low and venomous. "But you'll never be happy, Noah. You'll spend the rest of your life alone, stuck in your boring little world, while I move on and live my best life." I turned to her, completely calm. "Maybe I will be alone," I said. "But at least I'll be honest with myself. Can you say the same?" Her face contorted with fury, but before she could respond, I walked away. The divorce was finalized a week later. I got the house, kept my savings, and, most importantly, got my life back. Cassie had tried every trick in the book: tears, gaslighting, even a desperate attempt to negotiate outside of the lawyers. But Claire's meticulous work left her with nothing to leverage. It was over. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but instead, I just felt relieved. The first thing I did was delete Cassie from every corner of my life. Photos, contacts, even the barely used social media profiles she'd once insisted we share. It wasn't just about removing her presence, it was about reclaiming space for myself. Then, I turned to the house. Room by room, I cleared out every trace of her. Her gaudy throw pillows, the overpriced candles she never lit, even the cheesy fridge magnets she insisted we buy on trips, it all had to go. By the time I finished, the house didn't feel like our house anymore. It felt like mine. That weekend, Zach came into town for a visit. He showed up with a 6-pack of beer and a tool kit, declaring it was time for a home improvement intervention. "Man, this place looks like a dentist's waiting room," he said, surveying the living room. "No offense, but Cassie's taste sucked." "None taken," I said, laughing. "What do you suggest?" "Let's make this place scream you," Zach said. "No more pastel throw blankets or fake plants. We're talking full-on bachelor pad, leather couch, big-ass TV, maybe even a dartboard if you're feeling adventurous." We spent the whole day ripping out old decor, rearranging furniture, and debating whether or not I needed a recliner. Spoiler, I bought one. By the time we were done, the living room looked completely different. It was cozy but not suffocating. It felt like a fresh start. That night, we kicked back on the couch, beers in hand, watching a basketball game. "So," Zach said, turning to me, "what's the plan now?" "The plan?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," he said. "You know, post Cassie. What's next?" I thought about it for a moment, letting the question settle. "I don't know," I admitted. "For now, I just want to enjoy the quiet. No drama, no games. Just peace." "Good call," Zach said, clinking his beer against mine. "But when you're ready, you know what you should do." "What's that?" "Take a trip," he said. "Get out of here, clear your head, go somewhere you've never been and just be." I nodded, letting the idea sink in. A trip sounded like exactly what I needed. The following week, I found myself scrolling through travel blogs during lunch breaks. I didn't have a specific destination in mind, just a vague sense that I needed to go somewhere far away, somewhere Cassie's influence had never touched. Eventually, I settled on a small coastal town. It wasn't flashy or exotic, but it looked peaceful, and that was all I cared about. The trip was everything I hoped it would be. Long walks on the beach, quiet mornings with coffee and a book, and no one asking me about divorce or drama. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. One evening, I sat on a weathered bench overlooking the ocean, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The salty breeze tugged at my hair, and the waves crashed against the rocks in a soothing rhythm. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about Cassie. I wasn't replaying old arguments or imagining what I could have said differently. I wasn't angry or bitter or sad. I was just here. In this moment. Alive and whole. When I got back home, something had shifted. The house felt different, not like a battleground, but like a sanctuary. I threw myself into work, started going to the gym regularly, and even made a few new acquaintances there. Bit by bit, I was rebuilding myself. And the best part? I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. I was just living, and that was more than enough. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. Wishing you a great mood and all the best.